Okay, we'll be with you in a minute. I'm just making sure the live gets going. For some reason, the live is not going. Okay, here we go. All right, bear with me for a minute while we get everything set up and I get all the recordings going. All right, well, hello and welcome. I'm Rob Howard and welcome to EFLtalks Action TESOL Caribbean. And we have an exciting lineup for you today. And just so you know, we're showing all this on the EFLtalks channel live, so you can join us there. And first of all, let me tell you, we have an exciting lineup, 10 speakers. And let's tell you a little bit about EFLtalks. EFLtalks, for those of you not familiar, is teachers teaching teachers. And we've been at this now for a few years, and the whole idea is to try and bring teacher development to everybody all over the world for a reasonable price, low cost, and let me get rid of the sunlight. Okay, the whole idea behind it is speakers have 10 minutes and 10 PowerPoint slides. Now, the whole idea is we can do this fast. We can get this in the recordings, and the recordings will be available for teachers all over the world so they can improve their teaching abilities. Now, this is our 27th EFL talk, and we've got almost 100 hours of teacher development recordings available on the EFLtalks YouTube channel. So be sure to join us there. So far, we've got 322 EFL talkers. We'll have after next week 28 events. There's over 480 hours, 480 videos available with over 80. It'll be about 90 some odd hours with 200 countries representative. And you can get all the information. Go to the EFLtalks.com website, which will give you the information on speakers, events, everything we do. And then this is the landing page to take you off to our YouTube channel, which is where we store all the recordings, and also to our Facebook groups and any other kind of information you may need. Now, we're very happy. We started this in 2015, And in 2018, we were awarded the Eve of the Year award. It's because parity is important to us. As you can see, we have 200 women speakers, 122 men, and a frog. And as far as non-nest and native speakers, 207. So we're running at, I think, a pretty nice parity, and we're very proud of that. And if you can, just help us spread the word. We're trying to get the word out to teachers all over the world. And the best way you can do that is take your camera and take what we call a selfie. Turn around and take a picture of yourself with EFL Talks in the background and post that on social media and tell other teachers about it. Tell your students if you're at a university. Tell everybody, because we're trying to grow and make this the largest PLN in the world. Now, you can go to our website, and of course, we're all over Facebook. We have our Facebook group, which is EFL Talks. And we also, for teachers, we have EFLTD. And this is a place where you can share your ideas with other teachers all over the world. And I pretty much just sit back and relax, and it's for you people to all post. And we have our companion guide and our cookbook available. And we'd love you to become part of EFL Talks, becoming an EFL Talker. So if you have any ideas, get in touch with me. And this is what we're starting to look like so far. And I still have more people to add in. After next week, we'll have some more, so I'll have to update. And I need to make PowerPoint bigger because the pictures are getting smaller and smaller. But 322 speakers, we're excited. So sit back, relax. We'll get started with EFL Talks with Action TESOL Caribbean. I especially want to thank Suzanne and Renee, who helped put this all together. They got some wonderful speakers who you'll see here today. And they got in touch with me to do this for the area. So big hand for them. And while we're here, I'd like to invite you, because with everything going on, it's not so much of a happy time. So what we're doing is, we had a few weeks ago EFL Laughs, and we had just a bunch of men, a bunch of friends of mine get together, and we put together about an hour and a half silly, funny show. It's a comedy show, and let's have some fun. It's not about teacher development. It's not about what to do in the classroom. It's funny stories, it's songs, it's silly things, jokes, and we've set up for next Wednesday, May 6th, EFL Laughs. It's the women's turn. So we've got women from all over the world who are going to show that they're probably much funnier than the men were. So we hope you come back and join us for that. And just remember, everything is at the EFL Talks site. So what I'm going to do now is, we want to bring up our first speaker. So Filiberto, if you could turn on your mic and camera and join us.
Go.
Hello. And great. So if you can share your slides. You should have control.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. And just start the slides off. Just F5. Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do I've got the official timer here. I'm going to mute myself so you don't have to see me and we'll see you. And you've got 10 minutes, so you can take it away.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you for the opportunity. All right, so indigenous languages in a space contested by Spanish and British hegemonies. That's kind of what I want to talk about, and particularly the case of Yucatec Maya community in Western Belize. So around the mid 90s, as a teenager, I was interviewed along with my parents and one of my brothers in my parents' living room. And this anthropologist asked us two questions. She asked us, are you Maya? And who is Maya? And I responded first, and I said, well, I think I'm Maya, but I have trouble calling myself Maya because I really don't speak the language. And especially when I'm with other people who speak the language, then I feel uncomfortable. My brother's response was pretty much similar. He's just 4 years younger than I am, except that he thought that maybe he was mestizo because he couldn't quite call himself Maya. My dad answered next, and in his witty way, he says, well, I know I'm not a dog, and I know I'm not a cat. I am Maya. I don't know what else I could be. I understand the language. I do not speak it well, but it's not my fault. My mom immediately answered, and she pretty much shared the same thing as my dad. Just at that moment, my grandfather, who was in his late 90s, walked in, and if anybody was Maya, he was the real thing. So we thought we'd ask him. I said, Grandpa, are you Maya? And he said, yes, without thinking about it. And I said, well, who is Maya? And again, without much thought, he says, well, Maya is somebody who speaks Maya. I said, but what about your daughter, my mom? She doesn't speak Maya. Is she Maya? I thought I would, kind of catch him. And he said, no, she's not Maya. She's an Indian. We all laughed and said, so she was not mestizo, she was not Maya, she was an Indian. But after laughing, and over the years, I've wondered, my family was sort of converted from Maya to sort of uncomfortable mestizos, uncertain Maya, and ultimately Indians as people without without a language. And so I've kind of explored that question over the years, and recently through some interviews and some archival work. Just for context, so Belize is this tiny country in Central America, and Socots is right there at the border with Guatemala and Belize. And Belize was really carved out of Mayan territory, the whole region having been colonized by the Spanish. And though they never settled in Belize, they obviously influenced and considered their territory. Anyway, Belize was carved out of that space through contestation between two empires, the Spanish and the British. Essentially, they constructed this territory as being no man's land, as terra nullius, and by either symbolically or physically removing Maya people from the territory, and in the process reconfiguring the land, reconfiguring the people. People essentially and land acquired meaning only by being in place within the colonial economy. In what Quijano says, two things. One of them, the construction of biological difference into a hierarchy of race, where white is at the top and black and African and indigenous peoples at the bottom. And two, by the subjugation of land and people into the emerging capital economy. In a sense, the language experience of Maya people can be understood from exactly that framework, in the sense that just as how the territory was defined as an empty territory, linguistic territory, Mayan linguistic territory was defined as empty, so lingua nullis. Whatever language that Maya people spoke was not considered a language, and the only way they could be considered people and human beings was to acquire the colonizers' language, the European language. And so acquiring that language did two things. One, it civilized them, and two, it then placed them into an economy, into that colonial economy. So let us see how kind of that played out in the case of the Maya people. So the linguistic experience of Socots, really, this community, has been really the gradual replacement of the Maya language with Spanish and now English, and of a Maya identity to this notion of no-oneness. If we look at this table, this is kind of 5 people interviewed from one single family, so 3 generations. And we can see, for example, that we start with the first language in the 1900s, being Maya, to 2007 with a grandson, Spanish and English, the language of preference being then now English. So moving from Maya to Spanish, eventually to English, and in terms of identity as well, being confidently Maya to being sort of uncomfortable Maya to perhaps it doesn't even matter whether we are Maya or not in the grandson. So in a sense, what the Maya people of Sokot's experience was this idea of Mayaness as backwardness. Being Maya meant and means being less, as you can see from the quotes there to the right. And 2, one can progress from Maya to Mestizo by acquiring Spanish language and culture. So one can climb up the ladder by acquiring both the Spanish language and culture, and now English. The only possible change for Maya people was to become non-Maya. And essentially then, Maya people are the people of the past, those who built the temples, not the people of today. Maya people are those people who, like from southern Belize, where they hold their culture. So if you don't have their culture, you cannot be Maya. Again, you can see that from the quotations there to the side. The second thing, second element of that experience was that the European language is a symbol of civilization and access to privilege. In interviews that I conducted, for example, participants spoke about the importance of speaking Spanish correctly, especially the pronunciation of the double R, which should be, for example, the word reina, it should be reina and not reina, or arroz instead of arroz. And that in fact not pronouncing well was symbolic of being kind of backward, and especially from a remote area. There's an instance, for example, where one of the participants talks about she didn't want to dance with this young man who could not speak the language properly because it was embarrassing when he was asking for a particular song to be played by the band. So in the past, early on, Maya language sounded strange and weird to children. Today, speaking English with a Spanish accent is actually appearing as being strange and weird. So the consequence of all of this is essentially an erasure of Mayaness, but not only the erasure of Mayaness in terms of losing language and identity, but even the possibility of Mayaness. I can no longer be Maya because I don't speak the language. I can't be Maya because I don't have the culture. And you can see that, for example, in my instance, being interviewed in the mid-90s as a teenager, to the son in the table there today saying, well, I by default am mestizo. I really don't call myself anything. If I have to, I call myself mestizo. I don't want to call myself anything else because I don't want to offend other ethnic groups. Maya people really are those people from Toledo who have the strong culture, who have the language, and so on. So, and does it really matter? You know what? I'm just a person. Okay, Mayaness is not important to me. So we see kind of that trend. So, does it really matter? Here's an example where Maya people are using their language to rethink their future and rethink the way they govern and create a different way of being, using the concept of a bink, which is a Maya word, which means to listen, but actually is the word for meeting. If you think about meeting from that sense, a bink, to listen, then it changes and creates space for women and young people. Finally, we still tend to think about development. Development seems to be an overarching framework for thinking about education and language education. And it implies kind of moving from traditional to modern, so leaving indigenous languages to acquiring modern languages, Spanish or English. And therefore, the implication is we really need to move away from that way of thinking to challenge the way that we think about what education is, to consider the language for people's identity and their future. With that, I want to thank you.
You did it, and you even had 50 seconds left. Congratulations, very good. That was interesting. A lot of history I didn't know.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we're going to move on to the next speaker. Give me a moment and just trying to do three things at once. So next up, we're going to go to Janice. Janice, if you could turn on your mic and camera, please.
Please.
There you go. And let me give you control. Okay, so now if you could bring up your slides. And I'm seeing there's feedback about the link not working. Just, I'll let the people know here, the one in the share in the chat room, that is the proper live link. The live link is working correctly, and I just made sure that the link on the website is correct. So just have them try that link on the website. There's a direct connection. Okay, so Janice, thank you so much. I have my timer all ready. So
That's okay.
take it away.
Hello, everyone. I am Janice Jules. I am a lecturer of linguistics at the University of the West Indies. Currently, I'm based at EFL campus in the beautiful island of Barbados. For the next 10 minutes, I will heighten your awareness of a problem which confronts some English language teachers in the Caribbean. And that is holding on to traditional cultural practices, which tend to hinder learners' success in the language classroom. And then at the conclusion, I would reinforce the importance of allowing our learners to talk using the language that they know, the English that they know. And I will try to also leave you with a few strategies that you can use to promote their success in the language classroom. So in the Caribbean, the adage, children should be seen and not heard, is one of the very deep-rooted cultural mores. And research shows that teachers' beliefs often influence their teaching styles. And the same happens within the Caribbean. Often teachers bring their cultural beliefs into the classroom and they actually become classroom practices. So for this reason, within the English language classroom in the Caribbean, sometimes you have very teacher-fronted and teacher-dominated methods that are often seen as the norm. And in this classroom environment, as you would well recognize, very little, if anything, is heard from the learners, and their active participation in the activities and so on sometimes is often missing. So this means that when in this kind of classroom environment, what usually happens is that two features which should be present in any English classroom for success to occur with the students in learning English language, these two features are missing. And one of these features is that the learners who are engaging are supposed to be engaging and participating actively as they learn English. That's not there. In addition, the learners' interaction, the meaningful interaction with each other as they experience the language and explore the language together, that is also missing, simply because the classroom environment does not promote it. So the hypothesis is that these traditional strategies that some Caribbean teachers use in the classroom, which are linked directly to cultural beliefs that learners should be quiet when they're in the classroom. These traditional beliefs, these cultural beliefs should be replaced with more student-centered instructional strategies, which are going to allow and motivate learners to use language meaningfully and to express themselves using the English language as they are supposed to. The focus of this research that I'm talking about emerged from a larger body of research, a larger research project, which was looking at literacy. And this was carried out during the period 2016 to 2018. And from that large body of research, this present issue emerged as one of the areas of concern. There were others, and this was one that I paid close attention to. So for this research, primarily qualitative data were gathered from 6 countries with approximately 54 teachers. And the data were collected via interviews and persistent classroom observation, with persistent classroom observation being the primary instrument that was used to collect the data. Now, after this data was collected, the analysis was done via coding and the system of coding and emerging themes to result in the findings and the conclusions of the research. So I'm going to share with you now some of these findings. The findings show that the learners had limited opportunities to engage with the language. And this occurred because in most instances, the language was actually being produced by the teachers. So that kind of student-centeredness that was necessary to allow students to actively participate was not there. And the focus was on the teacher. One of the other findings that emerged was that in this environment, there were few opportunities for the learners to actually apply their skills of critical thinking and critical analysis, which are so vital. And therefore, they were not able to use these skills to collaborate with each other using the language, which is a higher order of learning, which is so necessary whenever you're learning any language. In addition, the learner's ability to ask questions to each other. You recognize that as teachers, this is an effective way to assess whether they're actually synthesizing the English language. So they're able to ask questions to each other, they're able to ask questions to the teacher, and this strategy tends to be very effective. But in this environment where the teachers held on to these cultural traditions where the learners are not supposed to be speaking, they're supposed to be quiet, and the whole focus on student-centeredness is minimal, then the students or the learners also had minimal opportunities to actually ask questions. From all the results that emerged, obviously there was an area of concern, and the concern was that the teachers, the level of awareness that was demonstrated of the importance of attending to student-centered strategies in English language teaching, that seemed to be quite minimal. And the conclusion was that this situation had to be addressed in order for teachers to go forward, to assist students in gaining success in the English language classroom. Now, research, and there's a whole body of research out there, reinforces the importance of conversation and discussion in English language classrooms. And when this happens, student-centeredness is primary, because then there's primary focus on the learners. They are the primary participants in this kind of activity. Now, teachers can also create a classroom environment in which learners respect the views of their classmates and know how to use language appropriately to resolve disagreements. That is very important. And with student-centeredness and focusing on allowing students to learn the language, then this whole respect for each other's expressions and each other's thinking through the language is there, and is something that needs to be emphasized. We also have the notion of accountable talk, which is important. And it's a process which learners, they have to be guided towards this. It's not something that they can do on their own. They need to be guided towards this. And with the focus on student-centeredness and allowing students to speak, then they are able to acquire these natural skills related to student-centeredness. So the recommendations as we go forward, learners should be motivated to use the language of negotiation as they work in peers and small groups. In addition, the aim is for them to move towards a more communicative classroom environment with primary focus on learner participation, student-centeredness, learner participation, and the ability or the environment that allows them to express themselves and use the language. And ultimately, Caribbean teachers, you must follow the trend of guiding learners towards autonomy But learner autonomy, we know, is another subject within itself, which would require lots of discussion, and that can be held back for another time. So, as I conclude, the good news is that there are some teachers in the Caribbean who are actually implementing student-centered strategies in their English language teaching. And that's a very good thing. Now, and while this number is limited, the objective is to ensure that other teachers keep pace with this current trend, and that they too can go forward and institute or implement the necessary student-centeredness in their English language teaching that can carry the learners forward to success. The thing is to move away from those traditional strategies and methods which limit students from talking, which limit students from active participation, which limit the amount of student-centeredness that is necessary for learner success in the classroom. And we need to go forward with the kind of strategies that promote student-centeredness. So as I said, while we have some evidence of student-centeredness not being used, the good thing is that there are some teachers who are going forward with this. So I want to thank you very much for listening, and I hope I was able to add some knowledge, some aspect of knowledge to this area for you. Thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Janice. That was great.
You're welcome.
And we're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Marlena Henry. Let me make you co-host. And Marlena, if you could turn on your mic and camera, please. There you are. And you should have the ability now to share, so you can bring up. Okay. All right, so you're all ready to get going?
So
You can
hi
make-
everyone.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Marlena. So for the next 10 minutes, I will be enlightening you all about cluster acquisition in Trinidad and Tobago, mainly the two-word initial consonant cluster in preschoolers. So as someone who has taught and who has an interest in child language acquisition and well, mainly in preschoolers because they are the age of critical language acquisition, it intrigued me to see how language was being acquired. So my research focuses on how preschoolers acquired a two-word initial consonant cluster in English language within a Creole speaking context. So some significance of the research, there are two main significance, which is the linguistic aspect and the educational aspect. So the linguistic aspect of this research focuses on how can we understand what phonological processes that these students use in acquiring the consonant clusters and by extension language itself. And the educational aspect deals with helping us to help these students better acquire these consonant cluster and better learn language.
Marlena, did we lose you? Okay. Seem to be having a problem. All right, let's give it a second. I don't know if we're having internet. All right, well, let's move on and I'll see what the problem was and we'll work that out. All right, the next one up is Nadine. And Nadine couldn't be here today, so she's made a recording for us. And let me bring up the recording. And I'll just mute myself. So this is Nadine. She's in Hong Kong, so she's sleeping right now. And let me just mute myself and we'll start off Nadine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadine Machete, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Hong Kong. I'm Jamaican. And in this talk, I want to share with you the top 3 global competencies that my research has been revealing that should be prioritized for Jamaican English language teachers in Japan in particular. And that's because my research focuses on global, that's local and global, citizenship education in English language teaching from the perspective of Jamaicans teaching English in Japan. So these top 3 global competencies that I will share with you are going to come from across 5 global competence lists and frameworks that I have accessed for the purposes of my research. So what is global competence? Global competence is that combination of values, skills, and attitudes, knowledge as well, that allow us to effectively, harmoniously, and efficiently coexist with ourselves, with other people, and with nature. So this is the first of the 5 competency lists and frameworks that I will introduce. This comes from Vision 2030 Jamaica. It's the listing of the qualities of the educated Jamaican. The educated Jamaican should love to learn, be well-rounded, speak an additional language. The educated Jamaican is a productive citizen worker, and contributes to national development. And you'll notice that all of these are primarily attitudes and reflective of Jamaican values. And number 3 is the only skill that's explicitly listed, and that's to speak an additional language. This is the listing of competencies for the ideal Caribbean citizen. And this comes from CARICOM, and CARICOM is like the EU of the Caribbean, for those who don't know. So as a CARICOM member state, Jamaica must produce or develop in its citizens the ideal Caribbean qualities. And these are they. Already we can see some similarities. We see knowing how to learn, knowing oneself, and that is related to the ideal the educated Jamaican loving to learn, or loving learning and being rounded. The number 10 is ability to manage change and to transform society and self. And that, of course, relates to the educated Jamaican being willing and ready to contribute to national development. Number 9 is multilingualism, and that's, of course, a recurrence of being able to speak an additional language. This is the Zest for Life framework from Japan, and this is their proposed way of conceptualizing what their citizens should look like for the 21st century. Now, Zest for Life rests on the Japanese Yutori philosophy, which focuses on academic prowess at its heart, and then expanding upward and outward into moral, mental, and physical health. And you'll see that represented in their framework, which has three almost like concentric circles, where basic literacies and skills expanding outward and upward to collaborative thinking and practical abilities to act for the world. So if you look a little closer at the listing of the competencies within the framework, you will see some similarities to the Jamaica and CARICOM listing, like critical thinking, metacognition, and adaptability. But I want you to remember these four major terms or qualities for the higher skills. That's the ability to act for the world, should be evidenced in autonomous activities, relationship building, motivation to social participation, and responsibility for building a sustainable future. And those are specifically connected to the Pisa Global Competence Framework and the four major listing of competencies that should be demonstrated by a global citizen. Now, to draw your attention to the outer circle, you will see the dimensions of global competence according to Pisa. And Pisa is the program for international student assessment. And I've included Pisa in my analysis and preparation for my research work because Pisa is offering the first of its kind, an international assessment of whether participating nations are developing globally competent citizens. Of course, there are criticisms of PISA and, the fact that PISA sometimes can be representing a global agenda that does not always include voices from the South or takes into serious consideration the learning context of the global South, which as Caribbean nationals we would be concerned about. But their framework and the fact that they now have a global competence test is of particular relevance because Jamaica intends to start participating in the PISA math, reading, and science tests in 2021. And of course, Japan consistently participates, except for 2018, when the first global competence test was done, and neither Jamaica nor Japan participated. In fact, only 28 nations out of 80 that usually sets the three PISA tests did the 2018 competence in global competence test. Of course, they cited things like readiness, their curriculum, their teachers not ready. And these are things that, as a teacher educator, I would be concerned about myself. But their framework is of particular relevance because it brings us to another layer of the international trajectory of global competence and its necessity for teachers in general and for my studied teachers of English. So this is the 21st century competency framework, actually first proposed by the U.S. National Research Council as a framework of deeper learning in 2012, and it was adapted into the Ontario Foundation document for the discussion of their own global competences. And I found it quite useful as I tried to prepare my first stage of my research, which was an online questionnaire. It was quite useful to divide and use these labels for global competencies. These are the three domains of global competencies: cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And of course, the cognitive, as you might suppose, deals with our ability to think and reflect and just reasoning and those related skills. The intrapersonal is about the self, and you'll notice that there are more competences in that domain here already. The self, knowing oneself, you saw that in the other frameworks as well, learning how to manage our emotions. And the interpersonal is about the relational aspect of our being and being able to interpret messages and respond appropriately to each other. This is my initial conceptualization of these competencies. I found that there were 30 competencies across those 5 frameworks, and 14 were common to 1, 9 to 2, 4 to 3, and the top 3 were common to 4 of those frameworks. And those are ICT literacy, adaptability, and multilingualism. This is where I am now with my conceptualization of global competence for my study. You'll notice that I have maintained the 3 labels and domains of global competence. That's the interpersonal, intrapersonal, and cognitive. And I've intentionally positioned the intrapersonal at the center of this conceptualizing figure to draw attention to, yes, the number that's higher than the other 2, the number of individual competencies, but also the centrality of the self, understanding our own values, being able to be reflective. And the 2 other domains are to the left and right, and they intersect and interact through the intrapersonal domain, and that's represented with the 2-way arrows. And interestingly, the top 3 competencies across the framework
I don't know why we just lost the sound, but hang on. Okay. Can you hear me now? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Rob.
I can hear you, Rob.
Okay, good. That was the strangest thing. That's a recording, and for some reason it stopped with the sound. Interesting. All right, so we're going to move on. Let's see. Next up is, I believe, Paulette. Let me double check. Yep, Paulette. So, Paulette, if you could turn on your camera.
Okay.
Your co-host.
Hi, I've lost the icon to share my screen. I don't know what you touched there, but I'm not able to find the icon to share.
And no, I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Paulette?
I'm hearing you.
I don't know why something has happened to the sound. 1 second. Paulette, say something again.
Hello, Rob, I'm hearing you.
No.
Aren't you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you guys clearly.
Are you hearing me? Paulette? This is Paulette. Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can't hear you at all. I don't know if anybody else can hear her.
Yes, I can hear her.
It's just that I no longer, okay, let me see what happens when yes, I don't know.
Hang on for a second. Ronald, can you do me a favor, unmute your microphone and say something for a second?
I found it.
All right, Paulette, say something if you could.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm here. Just give
Now,
me a chance
Paulette, I'm not getting
to find it,
your voice.
to share. I'm trying to find
Hi, Rob.
Okay, I think I hear you now, but I'm not
Yes,
hearing you on
can.
mine.
but I'm trying to get to get to the slide share. I don't know why something just happened.
Okay, all right, thanks, Ronald. For some reason, it's transmitting, but it's not,
No, I'm hearing
not
you.
coming over my computer.
I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Okay, I
All
want to
right,
go.
thanks, Ronald. I'm gonna mute you again.
I'm going on to share screen, but I
Yep.
cannot.
All right, you go to share screen.
I have now
Bring
lost
up
my
the-
document that I had, that I thought I'd be able to access on my desktop. Okay, just a minute.
Yep. Okay. Share screen.
I'm in share screen, but my document has gone, so that's strange.
And then you should see your PowerPoint there. Just double click on the PowerPoint. My goodness,
I don't understand this. This is crazy.
we're having an amazing amount of,
This
all
is
right,
crazy.
no, you're not sharing your PowerPoint, you're sharing your screen. Is your PowerPoint open?
My PowerPoint was open. Now I cannot find the PowerPoint, and it was there. This is crazy. Okay, I'll go into my PowerPoint and see what happens if it's sending me right there. I'm
Hang
so
on a
sorry.
second. This is tough because I can't do anything because I can't hear anything.
Oh.
Suzanne, I'm gonna make you co-host and I'm gonna have
Okay.
to reset.
Okay, I
So
can hear
hang on, I'll be right
Paulette.
back. And it's kind of hard because I can't
Can
hear
you
a
hear
thing.
me? Because I can hear you clearly. I can hear Paulette clearly.
Yes, I can hear all of you, but the bottom line is that my share screen is not
What-
allowing me to get into my document on the desktop. As soon as I hit share screen, that should have been off.
Okay, try unsharing and then making sure you have your document and then share again.
The document is on the desktop. The document is on the desktop. Okay, I don't understand what's happening.
Okay. Did you unshare and share again?
I've done that.
Okay. Sometimes when we share, there's full screen and then there's also a panel screen. Did it give you multiple options? And one of the options might have been the PowerPoint? Was that possible?
One participant can share at a time. I that's all I'm getting, but I'm not getting into my document. This is crazy.
Oh.
I do this every single day when I teach, and my document is on the screen once I hit share screen.
Yeah.
And I'm not seeing that today.
All right. Are you seeing the PowerPoint though running?
If I'm seeing what?
Are
The
you seeing
PowerPoint.
the PowerPoint?
I'm seeing my PowerPoint, but it's not in the share screen. That is the problem.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm gonna have you do this because I don't know what's going on with this. I've never lost audio before. Why don't you do this? In the meantime, leave and come back. Hopefully that'll be okay. I'll move on to the next. And then we'll bring you up afterwards. I think Zoom is being overloaded because that's very strange.
Yeah, this is strange.
If you see your PowerPoint but can't share it, I don't know why.
Yes.
It's not seeing it. So all I can think of is leave and come back. I'll move on to the next person.
Okay.
And I'll come back to you, okay?
Okay.
Sorry about that. The good thing is this will all be edited out for the recordings. Okay. All right. So let's see. Next up. Okay, Paulson, we're coming to you. So let's hope that you can see your PowerPoint. All right, Paulette, mute yours. And okay, Paulson, say hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, good. That's a good sign. All right. You're now co-host, and you should be able to bring up your PowerPoint.
Okay, are you seeing it?
Yes, we can. And okay, so you've got 10 minutes. Now, I don't know if this will make a difference. I'm trying to make a change here on the screen. For those of you, because you're watching on the YouTube channel, I don't think you can make Paulson any bigger. So Paulson will be signing, so hopefully you'll be able to see him.
Oh no, I'm going to speak. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give you 10 minutes, so take it away.
Okay, so this presentation focuses on using a bilingual approach to teaching literacy to deaf and hard of hearing students. I just want to draw your attention to two words. They might be new words to you, might be familiar with them. One is mumsamas and the opposite, which is sumsamas. And I like when I begin talking to teachers and trying to get a paradigm shift in the way they approach teaching deaf and hard of hearing students, to identify two groups of teachers, those who hold on to those traditional approaches, and one of our earlier speakers talked about that when it comes to teaching Creole speakers in the Caribbean, teaching them English, that many teachers tend to hold on to traditional approaches to teaching literacy to the deaf. But a Samsamas teacher is one who is going to base their approach to teaching on evidence-based practice. What does the research say? And they're willing to make those shifts in their approach to teaching and working with students as we learn more and more about what works, what the evidence says. So coming back into Trinidad and Tobago and realizing that there was a need for a bilingual approach to teaching, not just our students in the school system, but even those struggling adults who have left school and not achieved the level of reading proficiency that they would like. When we talk about this bilingual approach, we're talking about this regular use of Trinidad and Tobago Sign Language and English in the classroom, in the learning environment for the deaf and hard of hearing who wants to learn to read and write in English. And that's going to vary depending on a number of factors, because deaf readers are not homogeneous. They belong to a number of different situations in terms of language acquisition, the family environment, the proficiency of the user of each language, so that when it comes to being bilinguals for deaf and hard of hearing, that looks differently for the different students in your classroom. And bilingualism for the deaf and hard of hearing is not defined by equal proficiency. Each of those languages, the sign language and English, may be used for different purposes, and the rate of vocabulary development is not an essential difference. The setting in which I tried to promote this bilingual approach to teaching literacy, one, in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a little documentation of the sign language of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Ben Bradford has been doing some tremendous work with that, and a few others in the linguistic department. There's no deaf education courses available locally, and so most of our teachers are not trained specifically in deaf education. Special needs education does not give a teacher of the deaf what they need to provide instruction, literacy instruction for deaf and hard of hearing that will develop their skills in English. And you have more and more deaf people wanting to become proficient in reading and writing because there's a big consciousness now of deaf identity. They're aware more of the achievements of deaf individuals globally. And another situation is that sign language is not taught to deaf students. So even though sign language should be their first language, and for us as English speakers, English is our second language, but we learn English in school. So our Trinidad English Creole is our first language, but we attend and receive formal instruction in English that develops our linguistic abilities in English. But deaf students are not taught sign language in the schools for the deaf, not in the curriculum. So what was needed was for teachers to be trained so that, what we also found though, that made this a pivotal time to really foster this bilingual approach was that we, for the first time in Trinidad and Tobago, had qualified deaf and hard of hearing teachers who were qualified to teach. They were also proficient signers, and they were role models in the deaf community. That was amazing. And we were also beginning to provide professional development 2018, 2019 for teachers of the deaf in the schools for the deaf and in mainstream settings, in things like teaching reading, the shared reading project that has been well researched based on best practice and principles that deaf adults use when reading to their deaf children. Self-advocacy training, teaching writing using strategic interactive writing instruction, a framework developed by Dr. Kimberly Walbers, and implementing the Bedrock bilingual curriculum. And then we also decided deaf adults were begging for a class where they could develop their reading skills, even though they would not have developed proficiency in reading, having come out of the school system, they still wanted that opportunity. So I thought, let's get the teachers together and let's get this class for these deaf adults and focus on a bilingual approach to teaching reading. And there were so many benefits to that because we know that bilingualism, it is the norm for many of us. Bilinguals achieve milestones on time. It promotes language and literacy development, promotes cognitive control processes, and it promotes, very importantly, metalinguistic awareness, which is critical for our deaf learners, because oftentimes when they struggle to read and to write, deaf people fail to see that these are two separate languages. And because their visual spatial language has its own unique grammar, when they write, they often write without visual spatial grammatical understanding. And then when they read, they fail to see that because English is linear and follows a different grammatical system, that they have to think differently. So how are we going to do this? We develop the skills of the teachers. We have professional development to enable them to understand their own competencies in sign language and how to teach English literacy to the deaf. We knew that our deaf students, they needed to become proficient, not just in English, but in their own sign language. So a curriculum, for curriculum to work, it needed to develop the linguistic competencies of the students in sign language and English. using that bilingual approach. So some key pedagogic strategies that we use were things like sandwiching, where we would pair a signed concept with the print, with a picture, with some dramatization of that concept. We do things like chaining. So with chaining, if you signed something, you would have a printed copy of the English word. The difference with sandwiching and chaining is that you would have print, finger spelling, print, or sign, you would finger spell and then sign. And with chaining, you would probably show the print of the word, English print, sign the word, and then finger spell the word. We use finger spelling as a way to map English print onto sign and further reinforce spelling patterns. Translation versus transliteration. Sometimes when deaf readers would read an entire sentence, sign it, but there's no comprehension because there's no understanding of the deep structure meaning of the text. So focus in this approach was on translation, ensuring there's conceptual accuracy. And when reading, we move from story signing to story reading, where we have closer and closer approximations toward the English text. But first you focus on getting the gestalt of the text, understanding the text, and then moving toward, so several rereadings going on. This is what the class structure would look like, both in the school system. So we met with the teachers, we've been following up with them. And we've given them this structure to work with. And then in the adult reading class, we follow the same structure, where there's emphasis on the grammar, whatever grammatical concept we teach. And this would have been the very first lesson, so I'll just put a sampling here. That will be taught in sign language and then taught in English. And we use these placement maths, which is an English math and a sign language math. And deaf students understand these are two separate languages. And then there's a focus on reading, focus on writing, where we use the strategic interactive writing instruction framework to develop the writing proficiency of the students in the various genres. We focus on reading with comprehension from the start, and then daily word studies so that students get to understand the structure of words at the sound meaning and sound pattern and meaning level. Some key highlights of this approach, as I said, there's a focus on translation versus transliteration. Writing fluency, so sometimes deaf students try to write, they tend to be handicapped because they don't know the spelling of the English word they want, but we allow them to have a sign language temporary placeholder so that there's writing fluency. There's schema development, word categorization, vocabulary instruction, strategies for confronting unknown words, and focusing on English pronouns, which give deaf students a lot of problems. So to conclude, the four major arms of the reading program, the shared reading. So we teach reading using the 15 principles that we've learned from deaf readers who are successful in reading to their deaf children. The strategic interactive writing instruction, where we teach strategies for writing in an interactive setting and focus on developing the metalinguistic awareness of the students so they bring both languages toward writing. And this really has been very, very successful in getting students to see the languages as different as they develop their reading and writing skills. Thank you.
Very good. Just a hair over 10. Perfect. Thank you so much, Paulson. That was great. And we're going to move on to our next speaker. And let's see. We've got, oh, Paulette. All right, let's go back to Paulette. Hang on a second. Paulette, turn on your camera. I don't know why I'm seeing yours. Paulette, are you there? Okay, so we're not going to see Paulette, so we'll move on and we'll go to Renee.
My video.
Video won't come on?
No, you stopped it. I cannot change it because it says the host. Okay.
Yeah.
The host has stopped it.
Okay, great. Let me see, try now. There you are.
Okay. All right.
All right, good. So we'll get back on track. So let's see if you could start the PowerPoint, the slideshow.
Let's hope it's there. I'm trying to upload it. My screen is now a mess.
I don't know. This is the craziest.
I tell you, I don't even know what's happening.
Either do I.
My screen sharing has paused. I want to get back into. It's crazy.
We have a lot to offer. There's all these is retraining us in patience and figuring out things.
Yes.
No, but this is just simple because I mean I don't understand why it's just acting up in this particular way.
Yeah, it happens. It's completely unpredictable sometimes.
Yeah. Paula, try again. I turned off your and then turned it back on. Let me see if that'll make a difference. I really have no idea what's going on.
I saw myself. I'm seeing myself, so I don't know.
Well, now you just turned off your video. Turn your video back on.
Are you seeing my screen?
Okay, I see your screen, but now start the slideshow.
No, that is the problem.
You can't do it because it's telling you to sign into Office.
This is crazy.
My goodness.
If anybody can tell me what's happening, perhaps I have to do a research on this. I don't know. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Now I see myself. I just see myself and Rob. I don't see everybody. And I'm sharing my screen. I don't think it is in the Zoom.
All right. Right. No, I'm seeing your screen. Now what I'm seeing is it says you need to sign in because your credentials. So hit sign in. Let's see what happens.
Before.
Let's give that a second. Then next.
Asking me to create an account. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I use this every day. I just got off with a Zoom meeting.
Okay, now go to slideshow.
This is crazy.
And start from beginning.
Are you seeing me now?
There you go. Awesome.
Okay, so let me,
oh my gosh.
right. I'm gonna let you go quickly before anything goes
That's why
wrong.
anything else happens.
Take it
Anyway.
away.
Okay, so take it away. Okay, I'm Paulette Ferrero, lecturer in language, literature, and literacy education at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. And this research, as you see, it is titled Backyard TESOL. And if we can take any indication from how it is written, it's already sending a message that we're talking about challenging the kind of Eurocentric notions about second language teaching, ESL, EFL, anything at all that's called teaching English to speakers of other languages that have thrown our language educators into a quandary. Because as we know, most of that has been prescribed with, with the deficit ideologies that we need to perhaps apply a corrective measure, in teaching of English. And so a lot of time is spent on looking at the problems associated with the Creole languages of the English-speaking Caribbean that are so close to the target language that they pose a particular challenge for teachers. But my research is focusing, veering away from problems, orientation towards solutions-oriented praxis and possibilities for change that empower teachers to grow their own research and practice for international context. And so what we talk about now, how do we do this? How do we cultivate backyard research? So of course, the backyard is suggesting the professional space that you know so well. And if at all we can stretch it, it might just be in the Caribbean yard space as well. And this calls for developing new dispositions about our practice. The first thing we have to do is employ critical dissonance, which is the ability to step back and question what we currently do. Why is it that we are so caught up in searching for, oh, let us teach English as a second language, but we know absolutely no way in how we can do that because we still revert to the problems associated with the two languages which are so close. And so the whole idea is to do that kind of self-dialogue that begins the kind of interrogation about what it is that we do. And it is this interrogation with self, the self-dialogue, that shapes our focus to see our practice as opportunities for inquiry and intervention and experiment. And so the whole concept of growing a homegrown TESOL pedagogy came out of the desire for us to be more self-sufficient, to strive towards looking into our own classroom practice to see if we can get ideas about what it is that meets our unique standards. And so I have employed two main strategies in my own research. In fact, these two things characterize whatsoever I do in my teacher education training program at the University of the West Indies. Number one, making the familiar strange to see differently. Now, this is the idea of your backyard, which is so close to us. Our professional space is so close to us that sometimes we tend to spend a lot of time focusing on the challenges that students have and not recognizing that the same students have opportunities that can really allow them to experience English language teaching in unique ways. And so the second position is moving from this is what we are to do, this prescriptive ideology, towards what I call a what if disposition about my practice. The what if, I think, leaves the space open for the kind of talks that can engage us in looking in to see how we can create that kind of difference. And my teachers, educators who are involved in the Masters in Education program at the campus, they are nurturing what I call post-method paradigm sensibilities. And so their teachers talk about TESOL. It's not about methods. In fact, it's beyond methods. It's building what we call a post-method sensibility that focuses on the particularity of our educational context, our community context, our countries, and the fact that what it is that makes us particular and unique, and to see that as something to celebrate and not to see it as a problem that hinders any kind of method or pedagogy. And we move into this practicality in terms of having our students engage in doing and using English rather than learning about English and and getting into notions that, oh, I'll never get this right. and this whole corrective, approach that stifles the whole notion of using English, putting English to use in real life and authentic context. And so this is giving birth to what we call pedagogies of possibilities. Now, a part of this process that engages teachers in talking about their practice, it's not just mere talk. The whole notion of giving voice and occupying, it is central to the kind of subvertive ways in which we give voice to the teachers who I call the subaltern of research. A lot of outside researchers, research teachers, they inquire about their practice, they look into their classrooms, but they never engage in the kind of collaborative research that give teachers voice to what they do every day in their own classroom practice. So they're in their own backyard, and they cannot develop a pedagogy about that, because much of the research is looking for the problems students are having with the language, the whole corpus, the whole grammar, the issues of spelling and this, and not recognizing the opportunities for what we call more utilitarian and purposeful use of language. And so the Occupy, it's about a place-based pedagogy that involves the teachers occupying a new space that gives them voice. And perhaps this is mainstream research. Maybe this space is a professional learning community or a kind of discourse community that gives them the opportunity to, interrogate self, question, explore, and examine ways of knowing and doing. And so I have borrowed this mantra from Television Jamaica: looking in, looking out, looking better. And it is this looking in and looking out towards betterness that empowers teachers as innovators of their own classroom teaching experience, that empowers them as researchers, not just subjects to be researched, but the actual instigators of their own research, and privileging this whole reflective disposition that leads towards the professional knowledge space and broadening their own understanding of the nature of English language teaching in the Caribbean. And the next point I want to raise is that these what if dispositions that I speak about, I have translated them in my own practice. I can think of two in particular that shaped an innovative intervention that has reaped tremendous benefits in our second language classroom. I asked, what if I were to integrate radio into my classroom teaching at the University of the West Indies? Would it facilitate the knowing, making English more audible and visible? Would it generate input, English input, in a Creole speaking environment? And the other thing I asked myself, if I were to engage my teachers in teacher constructed theories that allow them to interrogate the very curriculum that the ministry gives them to teach, to allow them to recognize that that's just a guide, but they can also question it and seek opportunities for experimenting, for intervening in the whole classroom practice, so that they can develop, the kind of praxis that leads to students building and taking ownership of their own learning, and to empower teachers in a way to allow them to recognize the autonomy that they have, and to shape the pedagogies that impact their own classroom, rather than relying on those that have been prescribed for them. And so I'm going to share two of the research that, the snapshots from those research that we theorized about. So we launched the UWI English Olympiad on News Talk 93 FM, our university radio. The mantra of the intervention was targeting English for global communications. And the research involved a pilot with 20 secondary schools in Jamaica. And, and we also having that professional space which allows our graduates at the university in Jamaica to merge with those graduates who are teaching English in Japan and Colombia and all across the world. They too were engaged in this intervention in their own way. And what you see on the screen are 2 of the Jamaican projects that came out of the 20 projects. And I want you to take notice that the teachers began with envisioning a pedagogy of possibility by theorizing in a creative way. They employed, metaphors, because, as language teachers, we have that creative arts-based background as well. And so they brought that to the education space. And so one particular school that has an auto mechanic business where they serve the community as a way of giving their students hands-on experience with the discipline that they're pursuing. They decided to launch a whole school intervention that dubbed English the engine that drives the business of auto mechanics. And this intervention involved the business group, the language group, those doing auto mechanics, and it's amazing the kind of writing and speaking opportunities, the opportunities for putting English to use in real life, purposeful and meaningful context that generated from that school. And the second school, they are really the guru for sports. And they talk about sports every day and their performance on the track. And so they came up with what they dubbed sports journalism, passing the baton of English for global communications. And it was amazing to see the sports magazine that they created, how they prepared a magazine program that allowed them to talk about their school success on radio, how they were able to build, the sports journalism, the writing for the media, and, blogs, everything you can imagine that allowed the students to write about their experiences in the thing that their school excelled in, which was sports or auto mechanics. And on the other side of the screen, you will see 2 international class projects that I am particularly impressed with, because both have been published, in 2019 in a book that talks about post-method paradigms. One Jamaican teacher decided that she was going to create a Jamaican corner in her Virginian classroom for a multilingual group that shared one thing in common, their knowledge of Bob Marley, our reggae icon and guru. They just wanted to hear more about Bob, more about our country. And so she built that classroom space that facilitated opportunities for students to talk and to share what it was like in their country, just exchanging different cultural things that they would do. A very powerful space that is still erected in that classroom even after the research, because of the success that they had with that. And the ambassador of English, that's another writing research that came out of it. I don't know if I'm getting the signal for wrapping up. But
wrap up, but you're about 3 minutes over.
Okay, so I'm wrapping up to say that it's the context particular, achievement, success driven, and participatory based performance that characterizes pedagogy. And of course, it's the hindsight, the insight, the foresight that takes us to this notion that we can grow our own research for sustainability. And my last slide is one of the topics from another project, Reaping What We Sow, Voice in Print and English for Export, which a school did in order to do their own research in the UWI English Olympiad. Thank you for listening to me. And I was overcome with my passion, as you can see, because backyard TESOL is something I believe in and practice. Thank you very much.
Paula, that was wonderful. I have a feeling that I could let you go on for an hour.
Oh, yes. That's what happens when something is so close to you and you feel it and you can see what your teachers have done with it. It's so rewarding.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, a very powerful message. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on and let's see. I'm going to turn off all that. I'm going to stop the video. And next up, we are going to go to Renee. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Putting on my glasses.
Uh,
I can see.
yes, I hope it helps. This is
I hope so
the
also.
strangest technical day I've ever seen, but we'll deal with it. And Renee, thanks. I'm going to have you and Suzanne talk at the end, and I want you to
Okay.
talk a little bit about Action TESOL. So
Sure.
if you want
Alright.
to say
Are
anything
you-
now, you can.
Oh, you'd like me to say something now?
Up
Okay.
to you. What would you like to do? Say it now or say it later?
I prefer to say it later. I'm focusing on whether this slide is going to open up.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Let's
so
see.
it's opening up.
Yep. And
Okay, it should be opening up. I should probably be talking while it's opening up.
yeah, well, let me thank you. You and Suzanne are responsible for getting these wonderful speakers, and I really appreciate that. You know, we've had a lot of fun planning this too.
Yes, we did.
I think I've talked to you two more than I've talked to anybody else in the past 2 months, which
Yes.
has been a pleasure, by the way.
Yes.
And
Right.
great. Okay, so I can see the slides. Just
go to start.
Slideshow.
Okay. Great.
All right, so I'll let you get started. I'll give you your 10 minutes.
Yes.
And take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rob. My topic is on alternative assessment and tertiary level academic English in the Creole/global context. And my reason for choosing that title is because I recognize that very often we speak about a specific context, but the strategies and the technology is applicable even to a wider space. So I became, so I'm a lecturer in linguistics and TESOL at the University of the West Indies and founder of Action TESOL Caribbean. And I'm interested in this whole idea of teaching academic English or academic literacies in a different way, particularly because when I had the opportunity, I no longer teach academic English, I teach research, but it is a form of English for specific, well, English for academic purposes. I became interested because I recognized that around, let's say 2004, when the tertiary sector began to expand, many institutions were practicing what I call isomorphism. They were trying to copy the content and the pedagogy of institutions that were more established in their practice. And this is something that persists. And when I have had the opportunity to speak to teachers, I recognize that they know a lot of information. They have a lot of information about methodology and context, and so, but actually applying their linguistic knowledge or their education knowledge at times is challenging. So I'm just giving a roadmap. So I'll reflect a little bit on the sectoral expansion, some discussion about learner characteristics in our context, teacher ideologies, best practices according to Brian Morgan, and some reiterations at the end. So this timeline basically shows that the government began with an education for all policy in 2000, and it became, I should say, system-wide. They started with secondary, then they went to tertiary, then they went to early childhood, not necessarily in a progressive order, but there was a domino effect from the elimination of the common entrance exam. And I think that this would have happened also in the Caribbean, where the tertiary sector began to swell as a result of less elitism in school placement and less, I should say, elitism even in the tertiary sector. So what happened is that the government introduced government assistance tuition a government assistance for tuition expenses, that's GATE. And also in the interim, they also constructed many more secondary schools. Now, I don't have all statistics for all the institutions, but I selected this actually out of a study that I did in 2010 that really focused more on the students' response to alternative assessment. But I thought that for this purpose, I wanted to talk about more the rationale and give an example of alternative assessment. So basically, what I'm saying is that even though there's economic downturn and there has been talk about lowered enrollment, what I did note, and even from speaking to teachers in a recent curriculum review, is that the organizations that are considered to be tertiary institutions of learning, they seem to continue to absorb the population coming out of secondary school. And that's because no, let's say GCSE or CAPE, which is our equivalent A levels, will be required at certain institutions. So I'm suggesting, especially in our COVID-19 situation, that 2020 students will still continue to enroll in these institutions, but also there will be perhaps more competition, particularly because of all the constraints that have been imposed upon us. But also, I believe learners will also become more discerning about where, for example, they can have a positive experience as learners. So it's also important to think about alternative assessment, particularly for the online context, as well as for the context that continues to absorb non-traditional learners. So academic literacy in the Creole context has a few characteristics, or let's say language learning on the whole. And one of the things is that there's a narrow distance between, let's say, the Creole and the Standard, and also hybrid culture. And this narrow distance means that learners are culturally close to English. In addition, typologically, especially in Trinidad, where we have a medium Creole, there isn't such a great distinction between the Creole and Standard in some features. You can even find Standard English features in our Creole. In fact, recently, an editor looking at some data that I had presented asked me, is this really Creole? And I had to explain because she was from another Caribbean island. But what this does is that it impacts motivation where language learning is concerned. And this comes back to this whole idea of deficit and liberationist. So what I have done is it mirrors the discussion that took place between Cook and Catrue on the global scale. And yes, there are approaches, for example, or a lot of the traditional approaches have been to focus on what learners can do, highlighting their unique features. And this research is still very important because it helps teachers put a name to, what they might be addressing in their practice. I also classified some as variationists who talk a lot about accommodating and integrating Creole into their teaching practice. So some of these theorists are Caribbean people abroad who have studied in the Caribbean, who have studied the Caribbean context. And then there's a group of transformationists, a term that I'm applying to persons like Suresh Kananaraja, who will be more widely known internationally, and Beverly Bryant, who's a Jamaican. And I dare say, even some of our colleagues who are here at EFL Talks can fit into this category of transformationists, like Paulette, for example. In addition, I speak also of Creole lobbyists who don't really lobby for complete use of Creole in the education context, but they lobby for the use of Creole and the rights of Creole speakers in social domains. And all of these perspectives are important to embracing Creole culture as part of language teaching. So what I'm proposing is that the transformative pedagogy really may require taking some of what is the old hat and looking at it from a different perspective, valuing learner autonomy, for example, not necessarily seeing the learner always as I should say, a subject for error analysis. Also looking at patterns and cycles within the learner's discourse. Something that I have done in my classes using errors to actually reconstruct a curriculum that would be suitable as an alternative to the institutionalized curriculum and still achieve the goals, the overarching goals. And then looking at learners as texts themselves. They have a worldview, a habit of mind, a story that unifies their experience. And this is also very important to take on board. So in terms of best practice, Brian Morgan is suggesting, and he suggested this for teacher education, but I see it also as important for being applied to alternative assessment with some adjustments that I've made. For example, looking at institutionalized power relations, textual patterns, not only for the student, but also those institutionalized patterns as well, considering all of those, the multimodal resources, including the oral, which you will see as what I gave an example of, and also teachers and students as text, because teachers also have their story. I remember reading an article which really inspired me. It talked about middle-class teachers with a middle-class pedagogy, teaching at middle-class institutions to learners who have middle-class aspirations. And that's perhaps a perspective that can be imposed if a teacher is not careful to step back and assess the learner characteristics. And this is exactly what happens in the case of the isomorphism that I've spoken about. So it's important for learners to be seen as active meaning makers. So I just give an example of a personal essay that I use. Now, narrative is not necessarily used in English for academic purposes generally at the tertiary level. It might be mentioned just to distinguish it from expository writing, but I found it was very useful at a group of learners, mature adults, persons who had no English qualification, and you find that at smaller institutions. I was able to use proverbs as a platform for beginning a narrative and to impose, I should say impose, but by guidelines, allow the learners to explore structure without being thrown into expository writing, especially if they come from an oral tradition or an oral discourse background. And instead of focusing on, let's say for the Creole context, voice becomes very important when you have two codes. Authenticity is important because very often learners would say that they learn off the expository model, and learning off, of course, does not lead to authentic writing. And of course, things like sentence fluency, not necessarily in the traditional way, but even if you use fragments and you use them with a certain license and you can justify, it's not about always correcting and always conforming to the institutional model. This is an example of a, I would say, a learner evaluation sheet that I use with adult learners, and they had a lot of fun, and their ages actually were sometimes over 40. And they love the idea of being able for themselves to say at the beginning of a diagnostic, I can do these things well, or I can't. And with each, I didn't have to say it to them afterwards because it was part of their portfolio that they would auto evaluate. And this is important because very often rubrics come from the teacher, they're very writer oriented, and they don't engage with this, this idea of metacognition, this idea of reflection that the learner can do. So I really wanted, for the purpose of the talk, to leave actually the idea of transformative pedagogy that is rooted in the Creole space, but is also relevant to the global space. And to end, I just wanted to highlight that, you know, we are post-method, but I also believe that our COVID situation is going to perhaps impose post-COVID as terminology that teachers might actually take on board, because it actually is so transformative by necessity in terms of all of the challenges and all of the resources that teachers and learners have had to draw on. And again, in this transformative context, the social context is very important to consider, as well as institutionalized power relations and constraints. Even though there have been situations of inequality before COVID, I believe in this context, I think things like digital literacy and access to technology have also surfaced as issues to be considered. I think personal meaning and also cognizance of teacher ideologies and learner ideologies are also very important. So I just want to leave you with this quote that liberation education is not a direct instruction phenomenon, and the best we can do is work to create the conditions under which students will begin to take the initiative to transform their thinking, their learning, our society. And in the process, as teachers, we learn a lot. Thank you.
Great. See, 10 minutes isn't that easy, is it?
How long was I?
It's okay. No problem. Okay, so we'll see you back in a little bit, okay? So Ronald, you can come on, and we're gonna go next to Ronald. So Renee, if you could mute your camera. And Ronald, let me give you control. Oh, wait a minute, wrong one. Okay, good. And Ronald, just say something. You're quiet.
Testing.
Okay. Yeah. I'm afraid with the way technology is running right now.
The whole world is using Zoom.
Yeah. Well, I think half the world is using Zoom, so that's the problem right now. All right. Well, thanks so much. And I'll give you 10 minutes. Show the ladies what 10 minutes is, okay?
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm going to time myself as well to make sure. Right?
Great. Take it away.
All right, so my name is Ronald Francis, and as it says on this slide, I am a PhD candidate in linguistics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. And coming off of what Dr. Ferrero was just speaking about in terms of understanding learners on a transformative approach, I want to talk a little bit about testing language competence before teaching or before moving into curricula and various pedagogical strategies. I think it's been well documented in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world as well, that when you have one official language in multilingual space or in a multilingual country or territory, that it poses various challenges. And those challenges include speakers who do not speak the official language or speak dialects or Creole languages or a variety of the official language that is not standard and not recognized by that country or space. They have difficulty navigating the health system, the legal system, and definitely the education sphere as well. And my research is zooming in specifically on education. The problem is that a system in which there is one official language and in a multilingual space is that people are automatically excluded. So they need help navigating those systems, and they need help understanding, or they need interpretation. A lot of that has been covered today already. And this problem has been studied by linguists in the Caribbean and education practitioners. And just as proof of that, I have a document from 1993, The Future of Education in the Caribbean, where linguists and educationalists came together and they spoke about certain policy goals, one of them being to recognize all the languages in use in the society as equally valid, and to see multilingualism and multidialectism as positive attributes. They also noted that the learning of English poses special difficulties because West Indian learners of English, for example, who have Creole backgrounds or Creole-related backgrounds, are not native speakers of English. And so the teacher of English has to be able to assist these students to acquire additional competence, which non-native speakers cannot be expected to acquire without special attention. So that means quite simply that for a lot of students, English is a second language learning experience in the Caribbean. And again, this has been well established in today's presentations. They mentioned, even though I don't have it on the slide here, the need for diagnosis, for understanding competence before we move into the classroom. And certain projects have been undertaken in the Caribbean to help with that, to make sure that all languages are equally represented and that students are taught in a language they understand. The two most notable of those are the MIT Haiti Initiative and the Bilingual Education Project from the Jamaica Language Unit in Mona, in Jamaica. Now, MIT has had, the Haiti initiative has had tremendous success. And I posit that that success is due to the fact that most, if not all of the students speak Creole. They speak French Creole. So the mother tongue is very clear, or the L1 that they're using is very clear. That is also aided by the fact that Creole is official in Haiti. So attitudes towards Creole, even though there are still issues of attitudes towards Creole, among the speakers themselves, attitudes have improved. There were challenges that those who pursued the bilingual education project in Jamaica identified. Among those were different attitudes towards a language in use, using Jamaican in the classroom, Jamaican Creole in the classroom, as well as different levels of awareness of Jamaican. So they discovered that students are multilingual and that students cannot be treated as a homogeneous body in the classroom. And they concluded that the approach in the bilingual education project, as they refined it, cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, as I have here from Devonish and Carpenter. So coming off of that, it means that there is a need, as has been established, to understand mother tongue and to understand L1, to understand prior competence or knowledge, what students come into the classroom with, and to study transfer, how mother tongue knowledge or that prior knowledge influences the speaking and the writing of students in English. But there is also a need not to treat the classroom as a homogeneous body. It means that we cannot assume that every student has the same competence, and we have to focus specifically on understanding the competence of every student in the classroom prior to pedagogical strategies being developed or developing appropriate curricula. And in St. Lucia, where my work is being done, I am St. Lucian. We have a multilingual and a multidialectal situation. So for example, we have Creole, which is a French lexicon Creole that is spoken by a lot of St. Lucians in to various degrees, of course. And then we have English, which is the one official language. And then there is a new emergent variety that scholars have identified called vernacular English of St. Lucia. It has various names, but it's referred to as vernacular English of St. Lucia. And we do not know which of these or how much competence students have in each of these varieties or each of these languages in question. So my study specifically looks at the writing of students. That is my PhD study, among other things. It looks at the writing of students, and I focus specifically on errors, even though that is not the study is not delimited by that. But I want to understand how much of the forms that I'm seeing in the writing are Creole influenced forms or forms that bear semblance to Creole, the French lexicon Creole. It's also important to understand the forms that are non-Creole influenced or things that are due to the innate complexity of English. I will show an example of that shortly. And then, of course, unattributed forms or shared forms, which form a minority of the things that I see, because vessel, as far as has been discussed in the literature, borrows from Creole and from English. You know, it's a contact variety or contact language or contact dialect, however you'd like to refer to it, because that is not clear in the literature as yet. But there are some forms that are shared by both systems, the two major systems at play. And so I want to understand these forms and understand the relationship between these forms and how students perform academically. And just to be clear about what I mean by Creole influence or non-Creole influence, here are two examples. So here is something that I might call a Creole influenced verb form in the writing. A student might say something like, the boy swing the bat. And it has been established that unmarked non-stative verbs mark past tense in Creole languages, particularly Atlantic Creoles. And something that might be considered non-Creole influenced would be something like the boy swinged the bat, for example. And that is due to the fact that that verb is irregular in English. It has an irregular past tense. So what does all this mean? What does the data say? Well, let's consider two students from the same school. In fact, two students from the very same classroom. The first student I found, after analyzing the writing of that student, 48% of the forms, the grammatical forms, the structural forms found in the writing bore greater semblance to Creole or were what I would call Creole influenced forms. And that student got about 18 out of 30 in the essay. So we have to ask ourselves, well, is this student Creole dominant or Creole dominant? Within that very same classroom, there's another student in which only 0.05%, right? We're talking about really just a small percentage of the errors found in the essay were Creole influenced forms. And that student got 18.5 out of 30, so about the same grade. So we have to ask ourselves as well, is that student English dominant as opposed to Creole dominant? How much competence does that student have in English? Just to mention the second student here, most of the errors that I found, or the non-standard forms that I found in the writing, were due to the innate complexity of English, or things like the second example that I showed in the previous slide. So what does all of this mean? It means exactly what Devonish and Carpenter found in the bilingual education project, which is that one size does not fit all in teaching. And that diagnosis, as was mentioned in the 1993 paper from CARICOM, is important. Students need to be tested before teaching so that we understand exactly what competency come into the classroom with. From a pedagogical perspective, we know that the variability that has been identified is too high to ignore, because if we treat the classroom as homogeneous, inadvertently or advertently, some students will be left out. And we also know that learner corpora, or doing work like the work I'm doing right now, can be a very useful tool in analyzing the problem areas and developing appropriate curricula for the Caribbean, for St. Lucia specifically that I'm studying. So I suggest a simple formula. Start with learner corpora, pick up copies of students' writing, analyze the writing of students, record students and analyze their speech, test competence so that we have an understanding of a student's knowledge prior to entering the classroom or while they are developing in the education system, and then developing pedagogy or curricula that are better suited for multilingual situations. Thank you. I believe I was right on time there, 10 minutes.
Excellent. That was great. It's very interesting. I'm working with Russians, and I can see the exact same thing with the Russian language creeping into their writing. So that's quite interesting. Thank you so much, Ronald, and I appreciate it.
And thank you, Rob and Doctor, for giving me the opportunity. That's my timer going off.
Great. Mine too. Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, so moving on, we are going to take a little trip. Mr. Hughes, can you join us? Oh,
Hey,
nice
Rob.
background. Come on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. How are you?
Yeah, all the way from Maracas Beach in Trinidad. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the background.
It was interesting. For those of you who don't know Mr. Hughes, he's my friend from Brazil. But
based in Brazil, yeah.
Yeah, but I happen to remember that he was originally from Trinidad and Tobago.
That's right.
So I invited him along. And let's see, let me make sure. Did I give you?
Hold on. Let me share my screen. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let me try it. Hold on. Just a minute.
How's everything in the old neighborhood?
Yeah, the old neighborhood. Well, I'm sure you are reading what's going on down here. Not too good, actually.
Yeah,
things are not looking too good, but okay.
We're having a happy day here in the Caribbean.
Yes. Yeah, nice breezy day.
Great. Okay, so I'll give you 10 minutes. Thanks for doing this. And
all right, let me start my timer as well. Okay, ready.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so good afternoon, everybody, or hello, everyone. Yes, so my background is here, and I want to start with a quick intro. Hopefully I can get to move my slides, but the purpose of the talk, as it says there, is creating offline activities to maximize online learning. And I thought about talking about this because we are in the midst of COVID and the fact that most schools are closed, and how can we get students to continue working online or at home particularly. So I've been doing a lot of online teaching for many years. So that this is not the first time I'm actually moving into online, let's say, context. But now we see it more than ever. We need to have offline activities that can guarantee online learning. And that's why we're talking a bit about guarantee online learning and making sure that we don't exclude, because one of the big risks I see, especially working here in Brazil. I'm based here in Rio de Janeiro, as Rob said, is that a lot of students don't have access to anything in terms of internet. They use Wi-Fi at school, anywhere else. They don't even have a computer or something. So how can they study online? So this is what I want to do, provide some, let's say, suggestions, tips and strategies to help to kind of lessen or narrow this gap, which already exists anyway. It had existed before, right? So let's see if I can move my presentation. Hold on. Right. And since we're in the Caribbean, I have my backdrop there, I thought I could do a little extempo style for all of you. I'm checking my timer here. Okay, so let's see if I can get it. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Well, I would like to present to you a little story that is tried and true about a young and adventurous Trini. Decided to live in another country. Decided to teach a language or two and dabbled with some teacher training too. And has come to you at Action Caribbean TESOL Conference Santi Vanite. So I thought I'd just present myself like that because since we are in the Caribbean, right? And I hope you like it. Those of you who are from Trinidad, you know that it talks a bit about that style, what we call extempo, traditional calypso. And I hope this would kind of set the tone. So at the same time, we'll talk about strategies, but I want to make sure it's nice and light and easygoing. Okay, so first things first, as I said, it's not the first time I'm working with online teaching. So I enjoy this. It's part of my context. I work at universities here in Brazil, teach a lot of teachers as well. I'm currently doing my research on corporate linguistics, so I would love to connect with a lot of teachers and lecturers here. I see a lot of opportunities for us to connect and work with stuff, both in the Caribbean and in Brazil. Corporate linguistics, specifically on Twitter. So technology is also part of what I do. I love working with technology and teaching teachers about technology. So there's this question on the slide here: high or low tech. So how do we integrate them? Because we have to try and find common ground for both, right? So how can I bring in the most equipped and the most effective means of technology to boost education, to promote education, promote learning language, in this case, English, French, Spanish, whatever. And at the same time, make sure, as I mentioned, that people don't get left out. Sometimes not even teachers have access to the internet or technology as we would want them to. Or in their classrooms, in their context, they don't have that. So I wrote this article with a Brazilian teacher here called Andrea Edland. We wrote this article together. I'll show you the link here on the next slide. And it talks a bit about that, right? And it started off with a talk that I did many years back where I said to teach, but not tech. So teach the students, right? Not worry about technology, because a lot of times with technology, everybody talks or is worried about, how to make sure you use all the technology that you want in the class. But it's more about making sure you reach your students. So this is what we did in the article. And if you want, you can take a look at it. It's a blog post. I would love to get your feedback from all of you about it, what you thought, and some ideas. And what we do in the article, we present ideas of what you can do if you have technology, what you can do when you don't have technology. So we're looking at two possibilities and adapting the activity. So, and we want to show you that it's not about the medium. It's all, again, about the pedagogy. Yeah, the pedagogy is what is the core. That is what we want to get teachers to understand. And that has been one of my, I would say specific goals, but in terms of dealing with teachers here and educating teachers, Brazilian teachers who teach English here, is to help them understand that, it's more than just using all the high-tech tools. Okay, so that's the article there, and from there, now that we're in a different context, it's COVID now. We have people at home. This article, when I wrote the post that I wrote some time back, it was before the quarantine period, before lockdown, before everybody had to stay home. So how does that apply, as I put there, remotely? How does that work for remote teaching or remote learning or distance learning, whatever you want to call it? So I put there, create and innovate. So now teachers have to find themselves innovating or reinventing, not necessarily in reinventing the wheel or methodology, but adapting. So it is a lot about adapting to a different context, a different setting, so that to make sure that students are still being given all the support they need, right? So this is what I've been trying to talk to teachers now about, is that they create and innovate, but don't hate it, don't feel, well, okay, now it's one more task. So how does this work, basically? Thinking about this again, I wrote another blog post, and this is on my blog. It is called The Blog. I try to post a lot of things related to language teaching, English as a lingua franca, methodology, basically some reflections, musings that I've had, but some of them are more academic, more, let's say, blog style, but reflecting. So if you want to go in there, take a look at the article there as well. And I stress the importance of the offline, because it's not what you do online, not what you do with necessarily with all the technology, but what you do, you know, out of the classroom, out of that classroom moment of studying, that you are able to make the most out of any learning experience, not just learning a language. You see, so that's what I focus a lot on there. And if you're talking about it that way, it helps, because when you encourage students, and I'm encourage students, my students, and I guess teachers also to work on that, is to help them work with things off the computer, off the internet in this case. So how does that work? And going back to, okay, back in the days when I used to study French and Spanish, and as some of you mentioned, I think Ronald, Renee Figueroa spoke about some of the context and you know what happens in Trinidad, in St. Lucia, in Jamaica, right? When we learned another language, this is what I used to do when I learned French and Spanish. Basically, we have lists of new words, new expressions, and with 2 columns. But this is something that I decided to do at the time, and it actually, if you go back to language learning, language acquisition, you see that it works. Where I had created 2 lists. So on one side you had the English, and the other side the Spanish, and in 2 different colors, right? So you had like red and blue, and then I would just cover to see, you know, if I really understood what I was learning. And of course, in context, I'd always put a sentence there. I didn't even know I was doing that, why I was doing it, but then I learned that contextualizing language is much more important, because it goes back to understanding language as a context and how it is socially driven. So from there, then also you think of it, what we have is today, you have lots of these systems online of flashcards where you can do that. But if you go back to old school, where you can do them with yourself, where on one side of the paper you can write the new word, and the other side a meaning or reflection or comment, something that you need to remember to help you retain this language. That's it. So you know what translation, pronunciation, all of these things work, right? Coming down to my, I have 55 seconds. So I thought about flashcards, thought about this one. And also the other tip that I'd like to share with teachers as well is journals, getting students to write really pen and paper, talking about the learning process, talking about how they feel during the learning process and how it can benefit them. I think this touches on a lot that has been mentioned here already in some of the presentations about learners as text, learner, you know, as resource and input for the class itself, right? It feeding forward to the class. So basically, the last thing we'll say here is what we call the guiding questions. So a lot of questions where you get students to think about what they're doing, and this could lead into project-based learning, as I put there, PBL. It could lead to more investigation, more inquiry, and student-driven inquiry, right? So I think this is basically what I have, and I'm done. 10 minutes sharp, but I wanted to show you little tips, 3 or 4 main tips of how you can work with online activities to boost what they do online. That's it, Rob. I'm good. I see you have some comments here. Hold on. You have some comments.
Very good. And
yeah.
Obrigado, irmão. And if I ever make it back to Brazil,
yeah,
we'll have some rum.
All right. Bring it on.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you doing this. And
thank you.
We'll talk again soon.
All right.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so next up, we're going to go to Suzanne, and let's hope that everything works okay.
Yes, here I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Let's see if we can see you.
Okay,
Yes,
I'm
we can
fine.
see you. So far, so good. Fingers crossed.
Yes,
And just
please
start.
save me in case there are any frozen faces, any funny faces.
No. Make sure you don't make any, okay? And I'll cover it up if it oh, wait a minute. It's
Yeah.
flowing. Don't worry, I'll cover it up with a picture for the recording.
Oh, okay then. Okay,
All right.
so
Take it away.
thank you. Thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone who's joining us. I am Susan Rajkumar, and I am from Trinidad and Tobago, but I am currently in Honduras. My presentation today is on how the cultural context of an English-speaking Caribbean teacher inspired the use of game-based learning in the EFL classroom. I have my timer, so I'm going to try and see if I can stick to our 10 minutes. Just a brief background to who I am. My teaching experience started in Trinidad and Tobago. I taught in high school or junior high for a number of years before arriving in Honduras in 2000. So even though I taught some adults in Trinidad in some private institutions, most of my experience was with high school. So from teaching adolescents, arriving into Honduras, I was immersed into teaching adults in an ESL context. And then because of that process and the number of hours, I was led to creating content for lack of content. And now here I am in 2020 into peer sharing and where it takes us with lessons learned. So what were my cultural challenges? I went from a 24-hour cable and internet service in Trinidad and Tobago to 2000 entering into limited internet service and no cable. In terms of where we lived, there was nada, nothing at all. And I came from a culture that promoted creativity. Creativity is something that's a constant for us. Whereas creativity, when I mention creative ideas or doing projects, or my students saw it as a leisure. They didn't want to invest time into it because, there's a strong precedent to earn, which brings us to the attitude of poverty. Arriving into Honduras, it redefined my concept of poverty because in Trinidad, for us, it's just a situation where you can change your circumstances through education. Education, it's a place to become empower yourself. Whereas in Trinidad, what I encountered with a lot of, I'm sorry, in Honduras, what I encountered with a lot of my students, you saw that they felt very downtrodden, that the extreme situations made them feel that they were incapable of overcoming their circumstances. They needed to work themselves to the bone just to be able to live comfortably. So it was a very different attitude. So studying, finding time to study, if you weren't in a job that provided a salary, certain aspects of learning were considered like leisure. The diversity of indoor and outdoor games in the Caribbean is something that was very wide, very, very wide. We have beaches, we have mountains, we have hiking trails, we have tournaments, card games, interaction. There's so much socializing in our Caribbean context. And in Honduras, the history of violence in the country the 95% of the game culture is football. So that footballing culture, um, pretty much if you're a girl and you are not into football, you would be excluded from the majority of that gaming elements and all that goes, the hype and the aggression and all the things and the joy and entertainment, but it's very different. The different skills that a variety of games can develop. And island life cultivates trust. We are a more trusting society in comparison to mainland, where the history of violence really and truly breeded a lot of mistrust. People were very uncomfortable to be vulnerable in particular situations. So, what were the urgent adult ESL needs that I discovered? Everyone walked into a classroom and they said, "Teacher, I want to speak English well. I want to read and write like a native speaker, and I want to listen. I want to be able to understand." So it's like, okay, well, let's put in the work. What's the work? but they didn't want to do role playing because role playing means that you would sometimes look silly. They didn't want to look silly before their peers. They didn't have enough time to study. Their work schedules were really, really, really tough. And we're talking about decision makers because I've taught mostly middle and upper level executives. So these are people, they're decision makers in their companies. They're responsible for negotiating, for participating in deals, for representing their brand internationally. So there's a lot of work tied into how they are perceived externally and their personal sense of failure. They did not want to fail, they did not want to feel inferior by using a language that was not their own. So, how did my strategy to overcome these elements was to turn to gaming. Why? Why did I turn to games? Um, in our culture, in our Caribbean context, and this is where our culture comes in. I come from the land of carnival and calypso, and it's just a very natural part. Our previous presenter, Stephen, started off with extempo. Extempo calypso, you don't have to be a university graduate to create a calypso song. It is something that is cultivated in the entire population, little kids, older kids, elderly, young. If you have the ability to think of an idea that you can put out in social commentary, therefore you can have a calypso that's out. You add some beats, and if it's popular and it hits with the crowd, you have something that's out there. It reflects people's opinions. In the Caribbean, our culture teaches us, it empowers our opinion making. Our opinion making is seen in our carnival. Our opinion making is seen in the reflection and the commentaries that we made, and we're not afraid to express those opinions. That was something that I found was missing in the skill set of my students. So something as simple as carnival, anyone having an idea could move from conceptualization to engineering and design to performance for just 2 days out of the year. Yet this process is a process that is lived and breathed by almost everyone in the country over and over and over. Meeting adult ESL needs, this is where I could only think of the nostalgia that I had. I needed to change their mindset. And to do that, to change their thinking, I decided I needed to distract them or entertain them and play games, create new learning experiences for them in order to alleviate their stress and frustration. So what's the difference between gaming, gamification, or gameful thinking and game-based learning? Gaming traditionally you would tend to associate with electronic and video games, but game-based learning is similar to what Stephen was mentioning about preparing offline to get online. It is where we want to apply game-based principles to learning context in the classroom, which means involving them, getting them to play, doing grammar. This, they're doing verb conjugations, yet it would be different challenges for them. And if you'd notice in the pictures, everyone is looking at what's in front of them. They're thinking, I don't even have to prod them. They're sorting it out, and I have my timer. What do teachers need to do in a teacher game-based learning tactics? No one set clear objectives. Keep it simple. It's a game. Make it fun. If you see that the plan is not working and it's not fun, stop. Engage your students. Teamwork is always a must. I found in a mistrusting society, making them work as a team, giving them a grade that was common to everyone, made the strong help the weak and help the weak ask for help. And they found ways to communicate and socialize differently. Games must have rules. Rules, I found, as it pertains to developing our implicit memory, helps us automate the process. If they did something over and over, it created a pattern. And once that pattern was created, then they found, wow, I'm switching between the languages, and they didn't even realize in what moment that natural switch was flipped. Always bring a timer. That is my secret weapon. Rob has his timer of 10 minutes. I have my timer here. A timer keeps our games exciting. Doesn't make a difference. I saw adults go crazy because the timer is there. It changes our mindset and gives students game rules. The rules that we give them empower them. We take them out of their mundane world and we give them something different. They get into role play without thinking it's role playing. Think of creating new learning experiences. This is what I would leave with teachers. Think of creating new learning experiences rather than just teaching a lesson. Create a narrative. Ensure that they get immediate feedback. We're in a society with the internet where everything is at our fingertips. Students want immediate feedback. Fun, fun, fun. It's not all about crazy entertainment, but it is about how do I make it challenging? Challenges are interesting. Scaffolded learning. Make sure that the challenges can increase. 1 tense, 2 tense is mixing several of them, going together, and mastery. Stephen mentioned PBLs. These are points, badges, or leaderboards. I use deliberate practice points in my classes. As long as they do an activity, they gain a certain amount of points. They're seeing those points. They don't practice, they don't get points. So therefore, that is something that they look at. And player control. Changing their roles changes their mindset. Before you know it, they're doing different things, they're engaging in a different way, they're stepping outside of their traditional form of thinking. And before you know it, they're like, whoa, I didn't even realize. I had a student call me and tell me, teacher, he said, I didn't realize that I had changed. I said, how so? He said, a friend of mine came out, we've been in an all day tech presentation. And one colleague said, I can't handle any more English. And I realized I've been in the class for like the last 6 hours, and that used to be me. I used to have that kind of headache. I used to have that situation. So playing games taught them that they could do, there goes my timer. Playing games taught them that they could do different things. It taught them that they could think outside the box, and that they could learn another language, they could assimilate it, and they could produce it in the most natural way. So I want to say thank you to everyone, and I hope you have fun gamifying your classes. Thank you, Rob.
Well, thank you so much. That was great. And I'm going to switch back over. Let me see, you froze up. Why don't you turn off your camera and turn it back on again, Suzanne, if you can. Let's see if that does it. Okay, we have a different shot of you. And
Okay.
Renee, if you can join us. Renee, if you're still here.
There she is.
Okay, great. Let's see. Well, it was an interesting, actually, the talks were great. The tech was horrible. I apologize, but nobody will ever notice. We'll do the recordings and we'll take care of everything. I'll talk to Marlena, we'll get her recording and we'll get that up. But wonderful. I thank you both so much. I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about Action TESOL Caribbean. And so all yours.
Renee, your microphone's ready. Unmute.
Yeah, I got it. There.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Rob, Howard, and EFLtalks. It really has been a lot of fun collaborating with you. And I think one of the things that stood out to me really as we interacted was how important it is to have someone else's perspective of who you are. And the thing that I really loved about this experience is that very often in the Caribbean, we are told to present on Caribbean platforms because we are relevant there. And, you know, this experiment has certainly been, you know, an exercise in intercultural understanding and learning, but also it shows us that really, you know, when we use terms like creolization, it's really a metaphor for globalization, you know, even though I'm not going to launch off into another talk, I promise. But, you know, even though very often we talk about how we're different and we talk about different Englishes and all of that, you know, regardless of what the norms might be for internationally acceptable English or wherever you may come from, the differences, the one thing that is common is that sensitivity to a learner is where a teacher's heart is at. And, you know, these are the things that make it really wonderful to have the opportunity to share on an international platform. And we really thank you for that. Action TESOL Caribbean was really birthed out of the idea because TESOL is a practice, as Paulette suggested. People practice TESOL, but in terms of the reflection, that's something that people need to be encouraged to do. I also feel that often teachers are, they are given professional development from a top-down approach when they themselves have technology to share, with others. So we're looking forward to having opportunities, within our Caribbean region to engage teachers, to have them have their voices heard, and to validate their indigenous practice. So this is really essentially what Action TESOL Caribbean is about, and there are some other things, in the works, like giving teachers the opportunity, to, if they want to go to a conference, creating things like scholarships, and so where they can actually present and have their work validated. So those are some ideas that are really coming to my mind at this time. Without wanting to say too much, I wanted Suzanne as well to give her perspective and Action TESOL, and the fact that we have been collaborating between Trinidad and Honduras, all this time since last year. So over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you. This moment right now, Rob, and again, I think we've said it over and over, Renee and I, really and truly thank you. I mean, my heart right now, more than anything else about ATC, is a heart of gratitude. Gratitude with the people that trusted us to come on the platform with you for this, because it was a dream. It was a dream. I've been in Honduras for the last 20 years, and I saw the work that I was doing with my students and my teachers, and I wanted to be able to share that with my people as well. And getting involved in TESOL was like walking into an oasis. It was in the middle of a desert, sometimes being an idealist, people can think you're weird or you're outside of the curve. So it can be very lonely sometimes. And I think in TESOL, walking into the TESOL world, I found other idealists who believe that, teachers can be change makers, and they believe that our profession is so much more than just teaching a class. We can actually impact lives, and we can do more. And sometimes what I saw in Honduras is I saw a lot of tired teachers who were for example, in my country, our public system, I went to public school, and it's something that I am grateful for. Yet still public school in the context where I'm at, it's a real challenge for teachers. So I wanted our teachers to understand how grateful we can be and bridge a gap, be able to do something. So to meet Dr. Figuera and to work together with her, and then now be at this place where EFLtalks Caribbean is the beginning of the list of things that she mentioned before. I'm just grateful to be here, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you, your platform, to everyone, and everyone in the journey of us getting to this place where we're at right now. And I look forward to us going forward. I'm really excited. I'm really, really excited. And I'm going to take up Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes on his,
oh yeah.
I saw a lot of what he was saying. He talked of his list. I called it a peekaboo list, because I would have my list off the words in my own language. And I taught my students to do that. So we do the list, and I would call it a peekaboo list. So in the peekaboo, I would tell them, if you cross it out, I realize that when you don't look at it, anything that's crossed out, you don't look at it, but it's there. So it's like a cheat list. So I would tell them, do up your list if you have to, but call it a cheat list. So they would read in English, and their peripheral vision would be there. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, Stephen, we're probably the same generation. We probably got the same kind of teachers or the same elements, but why toss away what works? So I get that. So I'm definitely on board, with seeing what we can do together and getting involved in that. So again, thank you. Back to you, Dr. Figuera and Rob.
Yeah, great. Well, if everybody here, if you'd like, turn on your cameras, and we'll give a nice.
We get our Safli?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Filiberto.
And it's really, I really appreciate, all of you being here. This is, it's something, it's been 5 years. It's my 5th year now, and we're moving around the world, and it's really, as a few people said, it's a small world, and some of the things are, you know, apropos to different countries. Like I could relate to some of the things Ronald was saying with my Russian students, and I can see things that he said being important in Africa, which is an area we're trying to get teacher training done in. But I appreciate you all being here. You guys are great and very festive. I'd play some reggae music and we'd dance, but Stephen might start singing again. But
Rob, can you give me back?
oh, yeah, let me see. Sorry about that. Great. Okay, you should have it now, Paula. There you go. And good. So I think I've given it back to everybody. Yeah, and so really, thank you all. You're now all officially EFL talkers. Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you can see thumbs up.
Yeah. So there we go. Okay. So while we have Suzanne live and she's not frozen, let's all give a smile and a wave to everybody. Oh, great. There. Now I've got the selfie.
Thank you.
So thanks really to all of you. You were all wonderful. I appreciate you being part of this. And I really want to thank everybody who's out there, who's watching. We had a lot of comments. People were enjoying it on the YouTube channel. Give me about a week or so and I'll edit all the videos down, and you know, you can share them with your friends. You can do whatever with them, and we'll get more people watching them. And I invite you to all come back next week on the 6th when we'll be doing the Women of Comedy, and have a good laugh. And once all of this
Rob,
is done,
can I just say one thing? Our Marlena, she was really, really sad that she wasn't able to connect, but she recorded her presentation. So I believe she's been trying to compress the file and send it to you. So I expect you will have it. So she's bummed that she wasn't able to get back online with us, but she's also, you know,
we'll get
the unpredictability of the virtual world.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're, you know, when most of the world is on Zoom right now, so, you know, at least half of the world, I'm amazed that it's worked this well so far. So, all right, well, that being said, I guess it's late afternoon for you, so have a wonderful afternoon. It's evening for me, and I'm going to bed. Busy work day tomorrow. Thanks again for everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye. Nice meeting everyone. Well,
Nice meeting everybody.
Everybody have
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you,
yes.
Rob.
Adios.
Thank you, Philibert.
We have to connect. We have to connect. Huh? Yes, let's
that would be
connect.
great.
Let's connect. All right, then.
Maracas Beach. Yes.
Yes, Maracas. We can track.
Yes, indeed. Bye.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.